the pressure on the mid-level manager is immense. And last week I was working with two different groups of mid-level managers, and I could just hear it in their voices. And so what does that mean for us, right? When we're supporting systems that are in so much pressure.
Yeah.
And I always think about, in pressure, we also have like things like diamonds getting created, but in so much pressure, how are we holding the space for the conversations that need to happen, that want to happen? And they're not always positive. They're not always easy, but that it's these pressure-filled moments where I think new insights and change and transformation, transmutation, like alchemy, really starts to take place.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Britton, and welcome to the Coaching Money Podcast. I've been on a mission for the last 20 years to expand the coaching conversation to many. Along with my co-host, Evana, we're going to be exploring coaching as it relates to conversations, connection, and change in both personal and professional settings. Coaching Money is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen relationships and enhance results. Throughout the Coaching Money podcast, we'll share tools, practices, and approaches to support you in your conversations, one dialogue at a time.
Well, we're back for another episode, and I can't believe that 2024 is coming to a close. Today, we've got an exciting episode for you. It is called Practices for a Powerful New Year. And so I thought I'd start with a quote for today. So here's a neat quote I just found from Evan Isar. You can't do anything about the length of your life, but you can do something about its width and depth. And I really like that. I think, our work actually as group and team coaches is all about the breadth. It's all about the expansion. And so as you step into a new year or maybe a new phase or a new quarter or a new season, what are you doing to provide space for the width and depth?
I really like that quote. You kind of caught me off guard, but that width and depth just really resonates, right? It really to me, it kind of expands how I see things and how you have to look at things, whether it be as a business leader who wants to stay in this industry for the long haul, or whether it is in your own programming, or whether it be even around the kitchen table. I used to say this in earlier episodes, what does that mean? The width and depth of like relationships, results, connection, where I'm even thinking about the episode. I don't even know if it's dropped yet, is the stand out. How do you make yourself stand out? So for the longevity, which is really what this conversation today is about, is the practices for a powerful 2025 or new year. For the longevity of, I say this as an industry, as a business leader, as a group or team coach, but also as a human.
Well, and I think we have to put ourselves in the center, right? Human. And it's so interesting that this word human keeps coming back and hitting my radar screen. And so a few months ago, I don't even think you know this, but actually last month at this time, we went down to Niagara Falls to see Lenny Kravitz play. Very small concert, right? Like it was like 5,000 people. And if you can imagine this rock icon who I'm sure generationally, if some people are listening, like I really think about him as the music to the backdrop of most key moments of my life. I'm not a rocker, but he and his music has been there with me, whether it was back in university or all throughout my experience all over the world, because his music has been played all over the world. But his latest song is called Human. And I actually yesterday morning woke up and his music was playing in my head. And I said, I've got this music playing. And Andre looked at me, he's like, you have music playing in your head? It's like 4:30 in the morning. Like, what is that? And it's like, yeah, but what is it to be human in a world of AI, in a world of change? And I love that we are really coming into this practices for a powerful new year, because we've got to put ourselves at the core, right? To have the width and depth. It's about us. It's about expanding and cultivating our being. So what does that
Mhm.
mean? And what helps you show up at your best?
Yeah. Yeah, love it. And Jen, we kind of talked a few minutes before the conversation around what, pieces that are really fitting for this conversation, but I'm going to take us into another reality based on what you said in your intro. Just so I'm a huge Lenny Kravitz fan, and I saw Lenny when I was in university. So you're right. Like, and when you said he was with you in different stages of your life, I so saw him with me in different stages. So I totally resonate, and bringing it back to the human, and what does that depth and width look like as a human? It's also like, what are those practices for our own nurturing, for our own rejuvenation, for our own self-care? So we're going to get into the professional side of it, but for that longevity pieces, what are those habits? I think of you immediately of like you're swimming.
Yes.
You're swimming in the morning.
Yeah.
I'll let you say more about that. But what are those practices that are going to support us in those challenging moments, in those difficult moments, as well as in the flow? So we can actually receive the flow when we're actually navigating the dance of the
life.
year, life.
Yeah, of life and business, right? And I think that's where, just as you said, we want to make sure that we're not just focusing on one, right? Because I think a healthy business, a sustainable business has direct connect with who we are and how we're resourcing ourselves. And so as we come into 2025, especially, right, we're the era of remote work results is fading. The hue and cry of get back to the office is also fading, and people are resisting that. I think there still is a lot of uncertainty as we step into a new year, but what can we control? What do we have influence over? That's ourselves. And if we look to think about what does it mean to expand the width, the depth, which is really the range, and what we talk about in our activating your coaching superpowers, I think that's where coaches can have a space to pause, to reflect, and from that space of resourcing to move to the next layer, whatever that next layer is.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Well, let's get really practical, right? And I think for listeners who might just be finding this, I think there are some natural bridges between today's episode and things that we've talked about. I know one of our favorite episodes, and it has been for listeners, the intentionality episode. And so maybe that's a great place to begin. And perhaps you and I could go back and forth on what are different slants or what are different layers of the practices we want to be thinking about. So I'm going to kick it off and say, yeah, what about intentionality? How are we stepping into the year with clear intentions on what we want to create, what we want to bring in, what we might want to activate? And I know you and you use the word, what we even might want to manifest.
Yeah.
I think there's an intentionality to all of this work. So invite to listeners, what is it that you want to be intentional about in 2025?
Mm-hmm.
How about you? What are you thinking about with practices?
I'm thinking about the idea of how do you want to show up? And I'm not talking about the steps, but like as a being in your life, in your business, in your family. I think about, even if we think about it from a competency standpoint, the presence. How do you want to show up? What does that look like for you? And what does that evoke in you that has you light up? One of the things that I'm really getting discerning on in my evolution of 2024 is the Italian market, and where do I want to show up? How do I want to show up within this marketplace that gives me energy, that gives me vitality, and I think all of that wraps up into this whole intentionality. We can't do everything. We can't be everything. We can't have everything. So it's really important that we actually are clear on how we want to show up and who we want to be in those conversations, and in service to what, in service to who. So that way we can have, as potentials, realize that ripple effect. What's coming to you as I say that before I pivot into another piece?
Yeah, well, I think with the whole presence piece, it's not surprising how well received my recent speaking has been on the superpowers, right? So many of you have listened to the superpowers. Maybe you've taken the quiz. Maybe you've said, oh, I'm going to take the quiz, but I haven't taken the quiz yet. And what's interesting, last week I presented at this year's EMCC. So EMCC being the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. They had me back for the third year in a row to talk specifically about the coaching superpowers and how that body of research is expanding, because we've had several thousands of coaches take this quiz now in the last 3 years. What I'm noticing is more and more people are now starting to talk about presence in the context of coaching many, in group and team coaching. And that is our ability, right? It's the self as instrument, and it's our ability to really be thinking about how do we hold the space for that width and the depth. If we are not present, if we are not expansive, if we have not done our own work, it's hard to hold the space with any sort of framing beyond just a shallow band, if we can call it that. So I think, part of this practice is also about doing work for ourselves, on ourselves, whether it is filling our cup with what we need, to what you said, right? How much can we do? Well, I think if we're satisfied, I think if we are fulfilled, we could do more. But what are your unique requirements? I know that's a pretty sterile word, but like, I have a requirement. I need to be sleeping well. I need to be creatively stimulated. If I am not being able to use my creativity, I'm going to start to wither. That's just part of my DNA. And so I think part of this conversation is getting really clear with your practices on what the DNA of your being is. And so that takes me, before we pivot to another topic, right? For those that have a copy of Coaching Business Builder, take a look. Section 4, it's all about your ecosystem. What are your strengths? What is your stance? What are those values that need to be deeply embedded into the ground? And what is the ground that you're standing on? For some of you, as you step into a new year, there may have been shifts and changes. There may be future shifts and changes. And so what is it that you want to really anchor yourself in this year?
As you were speaking, Jen, another episode comes to mind, which is very a practical way of integrating some of this. Is you talked about earlier, the remote world versus the resistance to coming back into the office. And regardless of where people sit in those realities and worlds, one thing is fundamental, both in a coaching conversation, but I think as a human, back to the human, is the desire. We're hardwired for connection. And so I think our episode on the layer on connection and creating connection offers some great practical ways through your 6 layers of connection to help people start thinking about how we do this in a conversation of more than one. Again, whether it be at the kitchen table, in a boardroom, or even in a group coaching conversation with teams or just individuals.
I love that. And as you're saying, connection, right? And I think connection, we continue to see even more data around why it's important, even in a, especially in a business context. And so some of you know that I've been dipping my toes back into the world of where are we going on a macro global level. We've touched on past episodes, maybe not so much, but if you've been with me live, I've been talking about the importance of the inner development goals, which are things that we can be building in support of like global initiatives. And that takes us to the realm of change, which certainly in building practices, if we are in moments of change and sometimes turbulence, we need to have those practices even more dialed in so that we're able to shift and adjust fluidly with the changes, with the ebbs and flows that are natural. That's for ourselves, but it's also for our clients. And are we able to show up as fully as our clients need or deserve from us? So I think one area to look at certainly is for those that do work with leaders. We know, and I posted on this earlier this week in LinkedIn, that the pressure on the mid-level manager is immense. And last week I was working with 2 different groups of mid-level managers, and I could just hear it in their voices. And so what does that mean for us, right? When we're supporting systems that are in so much pressure.
Yeah.
And I always think about, in pressure, we also have like things like diamonds getting created, but in so much pressure, how are we holding the space for the conversations that need to happen, that want to happen? And they're not always positive. They're not always easy, but that it's these pressure-filled moments where I think new insights and change and transformation, transmutation, like alchemy, really starts to take place.
Yeah. Beautiful, Jen. Really beautiful. And if I'm based on what you're saying, I'm just thinking about the conversations I've been having and really that pressure. And I think as a business leader, as a new group or team coach, or as maybe a new entrepreneur or an entrepreneur who's really feeling the economic pressure, right? Is like in my work, I talk about the paralyzers of progress. And so really, how do we look at what are the things that we are putting pressure on ourselves? Is it social comparison? What are the practices we need to actually integrate ourselves so we can actually support our intentionalities, our goals to keep us going when we do hit that rough patch? So to me, it's when you're talking about that pressure is what are those practices? What are those habits that support us with even the pressure we're putting on ourselves, especially in times of change, in times of chaos? As I've said, I work with women who are often in relationship transition, going through a divorce. Their identity is actually challenged. And so we're having to think about what are those practices as we go inward, as we go into reflect on who we are, our identity, so we can emerge, so we can alchemize and emerge better, stronger beings.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the Phoenix, right? It's interesting this year for our Muskoka Novel Marathon. Should I just give a shout out to that? We chose the Phoenix as, an element rising out of the ashes because it had been 5 years since we had been able to physically come together to write. Yet that I think sometimes to evolve, and maybe this takes us back to the human conversation, to really evolve, the system needs to be shocked. I think, we can stay on our natural path, but it's when we have challenge that the opportunity to embrace change and to evolve really, really happens. And what was interesting, what was on my feed last night fell into the algorithm, and I didn't know this. I'm a month late for the party on this one, but I had not seen the robots that Tesla had put out into the world about a month ago, thinking, wow, isn't this revolutionary? What would it be like if I if I had a robot in this home that could look after all my needs of like things that needed to get done? Like that would be really quite interesting. But I only share that because I think in some ways we are stepping into a lot of unknown, and the world may be a very different place. And in saying that, having lived in economies that have gone through rapid change over the last few decades, where things like, and I think about moving in my old stories from being connected with teams in long range radio, it seems so far away now in a world that is uber hyper connected. But we're humans. We find the way to adjust, to adapt. And as coaches, how do we help people, just like you said, build the habits, connect with themselves so that they're able to have a smooth transition through the change?
Yeah. I love that the fact that you bring in the Uber example of robots, because I think as business owners, as leaders, entrepreneurs, I think this might be a practice to even consider for 2025 is like the what. There's a coach who wrote a book. I don't remember the name of the book. I'll find him. We'll put it in the link. But it's like, it's not what, it's who. If part of your intention is to scale your business or grow your business, like it's not what you have to do, but who can support you to do it. What are those systems that can support you, or even the building of your team, looking at the strengths and what are your strengths and what are the strengths of your team to complement you. So again, it's looking at, depending on where you are, depending on what your goals and intentions are, is really thinking about the practices. And maybe part of the practice is letting go of that control, letting go of you the solopreneur having to do everything, because maybe that's what's holding your business back, holding your life back, whether it be in your family dynamic or in your professional dynamic. So that's something that came to mind when you're thinking, if only I could have a robot. I'm like, oh, hold on. Maybe it's actually asking for help and surrendering to that, or being able to look beyond yourself again, a practice to support a powerful new year.
Yeah, it's the who, not how. That's the name of the book. Benjamin
Thank you.
Hardy, Dan Sullivan. Yeah, and it's interesting. I think very much, yeah, like who is in your network? Because we, even as solopreneurs, we really need to lean into other people, and it takes us also to another key important area. Practice is, what's your vision? Are you continuing to return back to that? Are you looking at your mission and your mandate? I've had a lot of fun in the last month really going through our annual and sharing the annual vision work. And it's been interesting because it has been one of our most popular episodes that people have been referring to and saying, oh, I'm so glad you did it. Because I think we often leave it until December. I always bring it in at the first part of November so that we can have time to percolate on it. But as a practice, are you earmarking time in the new year to revisit this? We've just started kicking off the Coaching Biz Mastermind, which is like our most intensive business development program. So Coaching Biz Growth Lab is going to continue to run in 2025. That's a bi-weekly touch point for coaches who want to really focus on their business. And in focusing on the business, it's also about focusing on us. But I have found that we need it even more, right? And that's where the Coaching Biz Mastermind comes in. Amplify. It's about amplifying us and our products and our business. So it's not just once a week touch point, it's a Monday and a Friday.
Wow.
So on Monday afternoon, we do an intention setting. We do a focus on, what our successes were and how to set up for the week. Friday is about the review, but it's also about going deeper into things. So I share this because having worked with entrepreneurs and coaches now full time, it'll be 21 years next year, right? I cut my teeth in group coaching for entrepreneurs and managers. And with the entrepreneurial set, I really feel as an advocate, we need that ongoing touch point because it's easy. It's easy to get caught into the tyranny of the urgent, as some authors write about. What is urgent for you? Because if we are a solopreneur or a smaller business, we're going to be focusing on sometimes the messaging that comes from outside and is not our side. So what is the practice? What are you doing at the start of the week and the end of the week? Have you been saying for years, oh, I'm going to do that on myself or by myself? Maybe you aren't. And, just a bit of a plug, go to coachingbizmastermind.com. It's our newest website because you've asked for new websites. So I think it's pretty crystal clear. Here are the 8 areas that we're going to be growing in on a consistent basis, because to practice is for a powerful new year. It's got to be done regularly. Back to habits and also the power of ritual and routine. And as part of this month's writing month in November, found myself into some really good new books around rituals and routines. And what I took away, I'll have to, you go to your point. I'm going to look this up, but I'll come back to this. I would just leave it before I pass off to you. Like, as you think about planning, so planning is part of practice. What is your commitment to yourself around planning and reflection for each week? 52 weeks of 2025.
Yeah, I love it. I just want to say it more forthrightly is what a great practice that we have at Potentials Realize as an offer through the Coach Business Builder,
Yeah.
And is it the Monday, Friday? Is that the mastermind? Because you mentioned 2 programs. So let's just
So the Monday, Friday is part of the mastermind. We do the lab. The lab is continuing, but that's only Friday every 2 weeks. A lot can happen in 2 weeks, which is why I brought the mastermind, is that really deep 7 months of work.
Beautiful.
It's an opportunity to really take deep dive and be held in that container of if you want to move your business forward, we've got to show up. We've got to show up 1,000%, not just 5% or 50%, but we've got to go all in. And so what is all in? What is all in for you? What's
And I love that because
momentum?
it speaks to the who, not how. So we've just offered a how. How can I actually bring that intentionality of building, scaling, whatever that means, growing, catalyzing. So I love that, Jen. I think it's really important, especially as we're at this point of the year. We've done our vision, but now it's like, how do we start to bring some of that into 2025? And I think what I love is a lot of the work that I do more on a metaphoric level than anything, but is that seasonality. We're in winter. Winter is an opportunity to slow down, to pause, to come back to our essence, to regroup. So we can come out and plant our seeds in spring. So this is really the time of year to really look at that and really look at who you are and what are those practices and what are those things that we are having to pivot or release, whatever that is, so we can come in with intentionality in a new year and have a harvest that we really do all want and desire.
And again, it takes time to get that flow going. And so over about 35, 36 weeks, right? It's not a full year, but it is the first half, the better part of the first half of the year to really be going, ooh, okay. And then I think in the summer, we want to use those summer months for renewal, which is why the mastermind's going to end June 30th. So that people can renew and then start to like enjoy the harvest when you're back to work in the September months. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So, what is coming up for me as I listen and think about this too is the ebb and flow, right? Back to the ebb and flow, which I talked about in Coaching Business Builder. What is that time where you really want to like be pushing and building and creating? And then what are those moments when you want to just let it flow, naturally tied into your own being, your DNA, your strengths, your superpowers, etc. And I think that helps us set up for that successful year, along with the vision session that we did. It's been amazing looking at episode 13, vision. We've had a lot of people looking at it online. I know you follow the stats for Apple and the podcast. What have you noticed about episode 13?
Oh, you put me on the spot and I don't have it at my fingertips. So
Okay.
I'm going to just plead the fifth on it. But what we are, in general terms, what we're noticing is that there's momentum happening on podcast with specific episodes. And that's why part of what we're doing is we're listening. And I'm going to bring this back to the ebb and flow conversation of really, are you listening to what your clients are asking, what your clients are saying, what's happening in the conversations to allow yourself to pivot? So part of the ebb and flow of the podcast is really we're listening, we're looking for that feedback so we can honor the ebb and flow of the needs of our people, which I think is really something that we speak about, we talk about, we advocate, and we embody. So I think it's really important. And if I can say, part of the ebb and flow also is the idea of where do you want to go and what do your clients, like what is your natural ebb and flow? You speak about it in one way. I speak about using the cycles of nature, really the outdoors. How can you be in your ebb and flow? And so you can always be thinking of what's ahead, but also what is needed. And I want to plug this because we're in day 26. Like a big part of what I'm leaving 2024 with came in that ebb and flow of your 30-day writing challenge. I've been dreaming, I've been desiring to get a book into something. And it's not, I don't even know how it's going to come out on the other end of it, but it is those small actions, right? So part of those practices, part of that ebb and flow is allowing yourself to feed in the momentum of what wants to be created and to go with that, always thinking and in service of really what your stand is, what your clients need, and taking those small, consistent steps, like practice, habits, whatever you want to call it. Manifestation really comes from those small consecutive steps. And atomic habits. James Clear speaks to some of those things. There's so many people who write about habits and how to get that momentum. And I think that is part of the ebb and flow, is honoring your own ebb and flow I think there's another great book. It's called Tiny Habits.
Of
But there's
course.
a lot of resources out there that speak to this to really allow that momentum. And so it doesn't mean that you always have to be out into the world, but it doesn't to allow that ebb and flow. Sometimes the ebb and flow is an internal ebb and flow. And for me, November's really been that internal ebb and flow in investing time, energy, resources, heart and soul into the book for that external.
Yeah. And I'm so appreciative that you have really you've sucked the marrow as we said, and I think that was from Dead Poets Society, suck the marrow out of life. And it is about showing up. It's about showing up consistently. So it's interesting that you raise the habits, right? So the book that I was going to mention that I'm still struggling to find, here it is. So one of the books that I've really enjoyed reading this month as part of my writing process for this new book on coaching and change is a book called The Ritual Effect, Michael Norton. And he builds on, so habits, as he says, habits are all about the what. What do we do and how do we do it consistently? But rituals add a whole new layer. And that involves, intentionality and emotion. And think about ritual. Ritual is so important for high performance. Teams have rituals. We as a team, and I, as I was reading his book, I was reflecting back to some of the many teams that I've been a part of in my younger years. We had a ritual of every Thursday night. We'd go round the corner from the office to a place that just closed down last year. And it was our ritual on a Thursday night. We'd hang out for probably 2 hours, talk about everything under the sun. It was before Lenny Kravitz, but anyways, I think back to those folks who we have scattered all over the world, but we had years of transformational work, taking an organization that was on the brink of closing and became the cultivating ground for leaders, world leaders who have actually influenced entire nations in these last 3 decades since that time. So I just think it's not only about habits, but I do want to put in the space about this piece around the ritual effect, because, I talk macro picture there, but teams that excel have these high performance rituals as personal people, as individuals. What are your rituals? I have a ritual that when I go to speak, and I did it last week, I don't eat before I speak, just because that's, in my mind, it's sort of like it takes away from the energy that I can then bring, because my body is trying to process the food. So it might sound a little wonky, but how are you showing up at your best? What is going to allow you to do that? And might be a book that you pick up. What's interesting is 2 other books that go with it. So I often take photos of what was I reading? So The Ritual Effect, and then Captains of Leadership, because so much of my work right now with groups is really those mid-level managers that are getting squished, as we talked about. And then another book called Lead with Heart, which I think is what you always bring in your work, Evana, in terms of the heart, the focus, the presence, the being. So practices for a powerful new year. Listeners, as you think about stepping into the new year, what is your impact? What is it that you want to manifest? What is the pressure that you're feeling under? And maybe is there a reframe of how that pressure can actually create a new nugget, a new diamond, not just something hard? I know in the moment of being in hard times, and this year has been all about hard times on so many levels, it's hard to see it, but I think there can always be in our rituals and our practices an opportunity for us to reframe, to pause and say, this will be over at some point. What do I want to use and do with this learning opportunity?
Yeah.
So setting up for success, what do you want in 2025? That's my sort of pausing inquiry for people to leave with.
Beautiful. I'm going to just build off the idea of ritual, and I thank you for sharing so vulnerably the ride and embodying the ride and sharing we're all on a ride and our rides look different, but also the ritual of how do we want to honor 2024 and bringing that to a close with honor, to close that chapter. And I'm just even thinking about our episode on closure, which was just released. So that might be something in terms of even the ritual of closure and group programs, team programs, the year, whatever that looks like. What does that look like and what does that mean for you? And just the idea of the power of small moments of pause to honor whatever is going on, whether it be at the end of the day. I've started a journal process at the end of the day, and I'll be very vulnerable. It's a self-worth journal. It's really to allow me, it's a ritual, it's a habit, but it's a ritual to really allow me to honor me and honor the growth that I'm really traveling on as it relates to self-worth, because it's a lot of the journey that I've been on. It's a lot of the journey that the women I support with are on. And it's also a lot of the journey of people who are evolving. You mentioned that word earlier, like part of evolving is rubbing up against that. So what are those rituals? What are those practices, which is different than rituals? And so that's really what I want to leave you with is, how can you honor? How can you celebrate? A ritual can be a moment of celebration too, of honor, whether it be a passing of a loved one or even the closing of a chapter of a job, starting another one. We actually had this in conversation with one of my clients recently. So how can we create rituals to support that moment of pause, to be able to then carry forward with grace and love and peace?
Love it. Well, everyone, we hope that you will step into the new year with us. Many more, I think, amazing topics ahead. Certainly enjoy all of the episodes that are more than a dozen now that have come out. And as you step through the threshold of an old year into a new year, enjoy.
Enjoy.
All right, everyone, be well, and we'll see you next year. Take care.